Master Chief Anya Sharma was now just Sharma, a logistics specialist assigned to the dust-choked purgatory of Forward Operating Base Concordia. The transfer papers described it as a routine reassignment. She knew it for what it was, an exile. They had kicked her off the team, the only family she had ever truly known, and sent her here to count crates and file requisitions until she faded away. They thought she was broken, a flawed component removed from a perfect machine. They were about to discover how tragically mistaken they were. Her arrival was a non-event. A C-130 cargo plane grumbled onto the packed earth runway, depositing her and a pallet of water purifiers before clawing its way back into the bleached white sky. No one was there to meet her. She shouldered her duffel bag, its weight familiar and grounding, and walked toward the collection of sand-colored tents and prefabricated buildings that huddled together as if for warmth against the vast, indifferent desert. The air was a physical presence, thick with heat and the fine grit of the Kandahar province. Coated her tongue and stung her eyes. She found the administrative tent, a stuffy, canvas-walled space humming with the drone of a failing air conditioner. A young corporal sat behind a makeshift desk, his face slick with sweat, eyes glazed over with the terminal boredom of a rear echelon posting. He glanced at her papers, his eyes barely registering her name. Sharma, Anya. Specialist Logistics, he mumbled, his voice flat. Barracks are Tent Delta. Your supervisor is Sergeant Mitchell. Find him in the supply depot. Mess tent opens at 1800. Any questions? Anya simply shook her head. Questions were a luxury, a sign that you expected a logical framework. She had learned long ago to discard such expectations. The corporal, Kenji Tanaka, pointed a thumb vaguely to his left. That way. Anya walked. Her movements were economical, her posture perfectly aligned, a stark contrast to the slouching, heat-beaten soldiers she passed. They gave her a passing glance, seeing only a woman of medium height with dark, unreadable eyes and hair pulled back in a severe, regulation bun. They saw the rank of specialist on her collar and dismissed her. She was just another body, another cog in the lumbering machine of occupation. Tent Delta was a long, low structure, smelling of stale sweat, canvas, and disinfectant. 12 metal-framed bunks lined the walls, 6 to a side. Most were empty, their occupants on duty. She chose the last one, tucked into a corner, affording her a view of the entrance and the single, mesh-covered window. It was the most defensible position in the room. Old habits. She unpacked with a fluid precision that was almost unsettling to watch, had anyone been watching. Each item had its place in her footlocker. Clothes folded into perfect, tight squares. Toiletries aligned in a neat row. Beneath a false bottom in the locker, she placed a small oilskin-wrapped package. It contained a K-bar fighting knife, its leather handle worn smooth by her grip, and a disassembled SG Sauer P226, its parts gleaming with a faint sheen of gun oil. They were not on any official manifest. Later that afternoon, she reported to the supply depot. It was a cavernous metal warehouse, a cathedral of cardboard boxes and stacked pallets. Sergeant Mitchell, a fleshy man with a drooping mustache and a profound lack of interest in his job, grunted a greeting. Sharma, good. You can start with the inventory audit on the comms equipment. Tanaka will show you. He waved a hand toward Corporal Tanaka, the same bored soldier from the admin tent. Tanaka led her to a corner piled high with boxes of tactical radios, headsets, and encryption modules. Just need to match the serial numbers on the units to the ones on this list, he said, handing her a datapad. It's a pain. Half the numbers are worn off, and the scanner software is buggy. Anya took the datapad. She didn't use the scanner. Her eyes, accustomed to parsing target data from a kilometer away through a high-powered scope, moved over the first radio. She tilted it in the dim light, her fingers tracing the faint etching of the serial number. 17 Alpha 9er Kilo 03 Bravo 6, she said, her voice a low monotone. She typed it into the datapad manually. Tanaka watched her, a flicker of interest in his eyes. You can read that? I usually have to use a maglite. Anya moved to the next one. The etching process leaves a specific refractive index on the polymer casing. If you catch the light at a 45-degree angle, the ghost image of the number is clear. She didn't look up. She was already on the third radio. He stared, dumbfounded. She processed 6 radios in the time it took him to usually do one. Her fingers moved over the datapad screen with the same detached efficiency. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. It wasn't just competence. It was a level of systematic mastery that was utterly alien to this place. He saw her glance at a newly arrived crate of satellite phones. She paused for a fraction of a second, her head tilted, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "That crate is supposed to be refrigerated," she stated, not as a question. "They're just sat phones," Tanaka said with a shrug. "They're the new L-band models," Anya corrected him, her gaze fixed on the packing slips stapled to the wood. "The lithium polymer batteries are unstable above 40 degrees Celsius. The internal temperature of this warehouse is at least 50. They need to be in the cold store." Tanaka blinked. He looked at the manifest. She was right. He hadn't even read that far. He just saw phones and directed the loaders. He called over 2 privates and had them move the crate, a knot of unease forming in his stomach. Who was this woman? Who notices the battery chemistry of a satellite phone from 10 feet away? He looked at her again. Really looked. The stoic face, the unervingly still posture. It wasn't the look of a logistics clerk. It was the look of a predator patiently waiting. The next morning, Anya was summoned to the office of the base commander, Colonel Madsen. The summons was not a request. Madsen's command tent was more permanent. A plywood-floored structure with maps covering one wall and a large, imposing desk of dark wood that must have been a logistical nightmare to get here. It was a statement of power. Madsen sat behind it, a man in his late 40s with a square jaw and cold, blue eyes that seemed to take inventory of everyone he met, searching for weakness. He held a thin personnel file in his hands. Her file. "Specialist Sharma," he began, his voice laced with a crisp, dismissive authority. He didn't offer her a seat. "I've been reviewing your records. It's unusual." Anya stood at parade rest, her gaze fixed on the wall just over his shoulder. She said nothing. Silence was a shield. 10 years in the Navy. Most of it is blacked out, redacted to hell and back. Special Programs Group, then suddenly a transfer to the Army for a logistics support role. A significant step down, wouldn't you say? He tapped the file with a manicured finger. "It looks to me like you washed out. Couldn't hack it in the big leagues, so they shuffled you off to us. Am I wrong?" Her expression didn't flicker. "My record is accurate, sir." The sir was sharp, correct, and utterly devoid of deference. It annoyed him. He wanted a reaction. He wanted contrition, embarrassment, some sign of the failure he perceived. He got nothing but a blank wall of discipline. "Look, Sharma, I run a tight ship here. Fob Concordia might be at the quiet end of the sector, but we maintain standards. I don't have time for personnel who are carrying baggage or who think they're something they're not. Your file says your previous CO recommended this transfer for personnel suitability reasons. That's code. It means you couldn't get along, couldn't follow orders, or simply weren't good enough. So let's be clear. Here you are a logistician. You will count boxes, you will file reports, and you will stay out of the way of the real soldiers. Do you understand me?" "Crystal, sir," Anya replied. The single word was as solid and unyielding as granite. Madsen leaned back, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought he'd made his point, established the hierarchy. He was the colonel, the commander. She was the failed operator, the clerk. Good. Because if you cause any trouble, any at all, I'll have you on latrine duty for the rest of your tour. This isn't some elite playground. This is the Army. We do things by the book here. Dismissed. Anya executed a perfect about-face and walked out of the tent, her back ramrod straight. She didn't let the anger show. Not the hot, quick anger of a wounded ego, but the cold, slow-burning rage of an expert being lectured by an amateur. He had looked at her file, but he hadn't read it. He saw the redactions and assumed failure. He didn't understand that the black ink wasn't hiding shame. It was hiding a history so violent and so secret that men like him weren't even cleared to know it existed. He saw a demotion. She saw a cage. And he had no idea what kind of animal he had just locked inside. As she stepped back into the blinding sun, her eyes automatically scanned the perimeter, the guard towers, the placement of the HESCO barriers. He could dismiss her all he wanted. The mission was always the same: observe, analyze, survive. And Colonel Madsen, with his arrogance and his pristine desk, had just become a variable in a tactical problem she was already beginning to solve. He thought he was in charge. He had no concept of the world she came from, where the only authority that mattered was competence, and the only book was the one written in the blood of your enemies. He had made his assessment of her. Now she would make her assessment of him. In the week that followed, Anya Sharma became a ghost. She performed her duties in the supply depot with a chilling, robotic efficiency. Inventories were balanced to the last bullet. Requisitions were filed before they were even due. Sergeant Mitchell, initially happy to have a competent subordinate, started to become unnerved by her. She spoke only when necessary, her voice always a low, controlled monotone. She never joined the other soldiers for card games or movie nights. She ate her meals alone, quickly, her eyes constantly moving, taking in the entire mess tent with each slow sweep. But it was what she did in her off hours that was truly telling. She didn't rest. She walked. Every day, just before dawn and just after dusk, she would walk the circumference of Fob Concordia. She moved with a steady, ground-eating pace, her head up, her senses fully engaged. She wasn't jogging for fitness. She was patrolling. She observed the guard rotations in Tower 3, noting the predictable 5-minute gap where the departing soldier would leave his post before his replacement arrived, both men eager to get to the mess tent for breakfast. She saw the blind spot in the Sector 2 camera array, a 12-foot stretch of fence near a collapsed irrigation ditch, completely obscured by the angle of the camera mount and a shimmering heat haze. She watched the quick reaction force drills. They were sloppy. Their response time was 3 minutes, not the mandated 90 seconds. They bunched up when taking cover, making them a perfect target for a single RPG or machine gun burst. Her mind, honed by a decade of infiltration and threat assessment, cataloged it all. The base was a sieve. The complacency was a disease. Colonel Madsen's tight ship was a leaky raft in a sea of sharks. One afternoon, she was recalibrating the targeting lasers for the Javelin missile launchers, a task usually reserved for specialized armorers. She had volunteered, stating that she had prior experience. Sergeant Mitchell, eager to offload the tedious work, had agreed. Sergeant Eva Rostova, a career NCO with a sharp, intelligent face and a skeptical frown, watched her. Rostova was the leader of the Quick Reaction Force, and she didn't like unknowns. Anya worked in silence. She didn't use the automated calibration software. Instead, she had the launcher's optical sight disassembled, cleaning the lenses with a solution she'd mixed herself from isopropyl alcohol and distilled water from the medical tent. She made micro-adjustments to the bore sight screws, her touch impossibly delicate. Manual calibration is less precise, Rostova stated, her arms crossed. It was a challenge. The software compensates for standard atmospheric conditions, Anya replied without looking up, her eye pressed to the sight. It doesn't account for the high particulate matter in the air here, or the thermal lensing effect from the ground heat. It creates a deviation of 0.5 mils at 1,000 meters. At 2,000, you'll miss AT-72 by 3 meters. Rostova was taken aback. This wasn't the language of a logistics clerk. This was the language of a master gunner. Where did you learn that? In a manual, Anya said, her voice flat, offering nothing more. She finished her adjustments and began reassembling the sight. It's done. It's accurate to within 0.01 mils. Rostova didn't know what to say. She had her top armorer check the calibration. He came back, his face pale. Sergeant, he said, keeping his voice low. I've never seen a bore sight this perfect. It's like a machine did it. It's better than factory spec. Eva looked over at Anya, who was now quietly sweeping the floor of the motor pool, as if her moment of savant-like genius had never happened. The dismissal and suspicion in Rostova's mind began to curdle into a profound and unsettling curiosity. She went back to her team and drilled them harder that afternoon, shouting about complacency, her voice edged with a new, raw fear. She didn't know who Specialist Sharma was, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this quiet woman saw every single one of their flaws. And she was counting. The pressure began not with a bang, but with a crackle of static. It was 0213 hours. A wave of coordinated electronic warfare washed over the base, a blanket of white noise that severed all communications. The satellite link went dead. The radios connecting the command tent to the perimeter towers hissed into silence. Fob Concordia was deaf and blind. Colonel Madsen stood in the center of his command tent, the Tactical Operations Center, or TOC, his face illuminated by the flickering screens of dead monitors. "Get me CENTCOM! Get me Bagram! Get me anyone!" he roared at his communications officer, a young lieutenant who was frantically trying to reboot systems that were no longer receiving signals. Then came the bang, a series of them, the distinctive, terrifying whistle of incoming mortars. The first rounds landed near the motor pool, erupting in geysers of flame and shrapnel. The second salvo walked its way toward the barracks. The base's automated CRAM defense guns, their guidance systems fried by the EW attack, remained silent. Panic, cold and sharp, began to bloom in the TOC. Alarms blared across the base, a pointless noise now that everyone was awake and scrambling for cover. Reports, when they came at all, were runners, breathless and terrified, shouting news of breaches. "Sir, they're through the wire. Sector 2!" a private screamed, stumbling into the tent. "By the old ditch. They just walked right in." Anya's blind spot. Madsen grabbed a handset, then threw it down in disgust. "Get the QRF moving. Sergeant Rostova, Sector 2. Now. Contain that breach." He was shouting orders into a void, his authority meaningless without the technology that propped it up. He was a man accustomed to fighting a war from a map, and the map was now on fire. In Tent Delta, Anya was already moving. The first mortar whistle had her out of her bunk before the explosion even registered. While others fumbled for boots and body armor in the dark, she was already dressed. She had slept in her uniform pants and shirt, her boots beside her bunk, laces preset. It took her 17 seconds to be combat ready. She moved out of the tent, not toward the designated bunkers, but into the chaos. She kept to the shadows, her body low, her movements a fluid dance between cover. The air was thick with cordite and the smell of burning diesel. Tracers, green from the enemy's AKs and red from the base's M4S, stitched patterns in the night. The sounds of the firefight were sporadic, panicked. Her soldiers were firing wildly, giving away their positions. The attackers were disciplined, firing in short, controlled bursts. She saw Sergeant Rostova's QRF team pinned down near the mess tent. They had run straight into a well-prepared kill zone. An RPK machine gun, set up in a darkened administrative building, had them trapped. They were taking casualties. Rostova was screaming orders, trying to organize a flanking maneuver, but her team was too green, too terrified. Madsen, in the TOC, was watching a single, miraculously still-functioning camera feed. It showed the mess tent. It showed Rostova's team being systematically cut to pieces. "Where is our air support? Why aren't the Apaches spinning up?" He yelled at no one. "Sir, the pilots can't get clearance without comms," and the flight line took a direct hit. Madsen slammed his fist on the table. They were being dismantled. Methodically, efficiently. The enemy knew their weaknesses. They knew about the camera blind spot, the slow QRF response, the over-reliance on technology. It was an insider's attack. Or it was planned by someone who had observed them as closely as Anya had. Anya saw the situation for what it was. A collapsing pocket. Rostova's team had maybe 2 minutes before they were overrun or bled out. The machine gunner in the admin building was the linchpin. Take him out and the pressure would be released. But the approach was a death sentence. A 50-meter open space, illuminated by a burning Humvee. She saw a soldier from the QRF get hit. He dropped his M4 rifle and fell. He wasn't moving. The rifle lay in the open. Anya didn't hesitate. The time for observation was over. The time for intervention had arrived. While the command staff flailed in the TOC, lost in their technological darkness, Anya Sharma acted. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't announce her intentions. She saw a tactical problem that needed solving, and she was the solution. She moved from the shadows behind Tent Delta, a ghost in the flickering orange light. The path to the fallen soldier's M4 was across a stretch of open ground, a fatal funnel. But Anya didn't run through it. She flowed. She used the brief, rhythmic darkness between the muzzle flashes of the enemy machine gun, a half-second window of relative obscurity, to move. 3 short, explosive bursts of speed, punctuated by dropping flat to the ground, timing her movements with the percussive rhythm of the RPK. To any observer, she would seem to be teleporting across the ground. She reached the rifle, her hand grabbing its foregrip. The soldier was dead, his eyes wide and staring at the fiery sky. She spared him no glance. She stripped his magazines and his plate carrier, shrugging it on over her own clothes. It was a clumsy fit, but it was armor. Now she had a rifle. She checked the chamber, her movements economical and sure. A round was seated. 30 rounds in the magazine. She had 3 spares. 120 rounds to change the course of this fight. The machine gunner was in a second-floor window of the administrative block. He was well entrenched, his position providing a commanding field of fire. Direct assault was suicide. Anya didn't consider it. She scanned the area, her mind a supercomputer processing angles, materials, and possibilities. Her eyes landed on a concrete drainage culvert that ran alongside the admin building, ending 20 meters past the machine gunner's position. It was filled with filth and stagnant water, but it was cover. She slid into the culvert. The stench was overpowering, a foul mix of sewage and decay. She ignored it, her focus absolute. She low-crawled through the muck, the concrete scraping her elbows and knees. The sounds of battle were muffled down here, a dull, thudding symphony of death. She emerged from the culvert directly behind the admin building. The rear was supposedly clear, but she didn't assume. She pressed her back against the wall, listening. She heard 2 men speaking in Pashto, their voices relaxed. They were the machine gunner's support, guarding his rear. They thought they were safe. Anya unclipped a flashbang grenade from the fallen soldier's vest. She pulled the pin, the soft click inaudible over the din of combat. She counted to 2, then tossed the grenade around the corner. The detonation was a blinding flash and a deafening concussion. Before the 2 men could recover from their sensory overload, Anya was on them. She didn't waste ammunition. The first man, stumbling blindly, met the butt of her rifle in his face. The crack of bone was sickeningly loud. He collapsed without a sound. The second man was turning, raising his AK, his eyes wide with shock. Anya was already inside his guard, her hand clamping over the muzzle of his weapon, redirecting it toward the sky. Her other hand, holding her K-bar knife which had appeared as if by magic, drove the blade up under his jaw, severing his brainstem. He went limp, a puppet with its strings cut. 2 down. Silence. She entered the building. The ground floor was empty. She took the stairs, her feet making no sound on the concrete steps. She could hear the RPK firing above her, the rhythmic chunk-chunk-chunk of the heavy weapon. On the second-floor landing, she paused. The gunner was in the office at the end of the hall. The door was open. She didn't rush in. She took one of the spare magazines from her vest and threw it down the hallway, past the open door. The clatter of the magazine hitting the floor was just loud enough. The RPK stopped firing. She heard movement from inside the room. "Ismail?" A voice called out. It was the opening she needed. In the instant the gunner was distracted, Anya burst into the room. He was turning back toward the window, realizing his mistake. He was big, bearded, wearing a captured American helmet. He swung the heavy machine gun toward her. He was too slow. Anya fired a controlled, two-round burst. The bullets struck him center mass, punching through his cheap vest. He grunted, stumbling back, his finger tightening on the trigger in a death spasm. The RPK roared, chewing a line of holes in the ceiling as he fell. Silence. The sudden absence of the machine gun was more shocking than the noise had been. From outside, she heard a ragged cheer from Rostova's team. The pressure was broken. Anya stepped to the window, scanning the battlefield. The attackers, their primary support weapon silenced, were beginning to fall back, melting into the darkness. She didn't feel triumph. She felt nothing but the cold, clear focus of the mission. She ejected the partially spent magazine, slammed a fresh one home, and began scanning for new targets. The intervention was complete. The shift was about to begin. In the TOC, the single camera feed had captured it all. It was grainy, pixelated, and shot from a distance, but it was undeniable. The feed had been focused on Rostova's pinned-down team. In the background, a lone figure had moved with an impossible spectral grace. They saw the suicidal dash for the rifle. They saw the figure disappear into the culvert. Then, minutes later, the machine gun that had been slaughtering their soldiers simply stopped. Colonel Madsen stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape. "Who the hell is that?" he breathed. "I don't know, sir," his executive officer replied, equally stunned. "They're not from the QRF. Their movements, they're not like ours." Sergeant Rostova's voice, ragged and full of awe, suddenly crackled over a runner's handheld radio, which had just come back into range. "TOC, this is Rostova. The RPK nest is neutralized. I say again, hostile machine gun is down. We have an unknown friendly operator in the admin building. They just saved my entire team." Madsen keyed the runner's radio. "Rostova, identify the friendly operator." There was a pause. "Sir, I think it's Specialist Sharma. From Logistics." The name dropped into the stunned silence of the TOC like a stone. Sharma? The washed-out pencil pusher? The woman he had personally dressed down and threatened with latrine duty? It was impossible. It defied all logic. He had watched the feed. The figure had moved like a wraith, a professional killer of the highest caliber. That couldn't be the same person. "That's impossible," Madsen said, shaking his head. "Get a visual. Someone get eyes on that building." Corporal Tanaka, who had taken cover in the comms section of the TOC, stepped forward, his face pale. Sir, I saw her leave her tent. It's Specialist Sharma." He remembered the way she had handled the radios, the comment about the refractive index of polymer. He remembered the quiet certainty with which she had identified the overheating batteries. The pieces, which had seemed so odd and disparate, were now snapping into place, forming a picture that terrified him. Madsen's dismissal was cracking, the foundation of his certainty turning to sand. He had built his assessment of her on a shallow reading of a file, on his own prejudices about her gender and her sudden transfer. Now, a crisis had stripped all of that away, leaving only the raw, terrifying truth of her actions. He had dismissed a clerk. A ghost had answered. He looked at the tactical map. The initial assault had been blunted, thanks to her. But the fight wasn't over. The EW jamming was lifting in sputtering fits, and fragmented reports were coming in. A significant force of attackers had seized the civilian contractor block, a series of hardened structures where engineers and project managers were housed. They had hostages. They had fortified the main building, a two-story concrete structure known as the admin annex, and they controlled the central plaza, effectively cutting the base in half. His strategies, his standard operating procedures were useless. A frontal assault on the annex would be a massacre, for his men and for the hostages. He needed a scalpel, not a hammer. And the only scalpel he had was the woman he had just tried to throw away. The irony was a bitter acid in his throat. The pressure on him was immense. His command was failing. His soldiers were dying. The base was on the verge of being lost. He had to make a choice. Trust the book that had failed him, or trust the enigma that had just saved his skin. The shift in his mind was seismic. Curiosity, once a spark, was now a raging fire. "Who are you, Sharma?" The fighting died down into a tense, simmering standoff. The attackers were dug in, and Madsen knew he was on a clock. Before long, the enemy would start executing hostages to apply pressure, or their own reinforcements would arrive to finish the job. He needed to retake the admin annex, and he needed to do it now. Anya had made her way back from the machine gun nest, melting back into the chaos as seamlessly as she had emerged from it. She was checking the wounds of one of Rostova's men when Madsen's voice, strained and urgent, came over the sergeant's radio. "Rostova, is Specialist Sharma with you?" Rostova looked at Anya, who was expertly applying a tourniquet high on a private's leg, her movements swift and sure. "Yes, sir. She's here. Send her to the TOC. Now." Anya finished securing the tourniquet, wrote the time on the soldier's forehead with a marker, and looked at Rostova. The sergeant's eyes were wide with a mixture of awe and fear. She simply nodded toward the command tent. When Anya entered the TOC, the atmosphere was thick with tension. All eyes turned to her. She was covered in filth from the culvert, a smear of blood on her cheek that wasn't hers, and she held the M4 with a casual familiarity that was more intimidating than any overt threat. She looked at Madsen and waited. The colonel, for the first time, seemed to have lost his polished certainty. He looked at the woman standing before him, this logistics specialist, and saw the predator he had foolishly provoked. "The enemy holds the admin annex," Madsen said, his voice tight. He pointed to a diagram on the main screen. "They have at least a dozen hostages. Engineers, mostly civilians. We count 8 to 10 hostiles, heavily armed, and they've barricaded the entrances. The building is a fortress. My men can't breach it without significant casualties and the almost certain death of the hostages." He paused, his gaze locking with Anya's. The condescension was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate pragmatism. It was a test, a plea disguised as an order. "You took out that machine gun nest alone. You move in a way I've never seen before. Rostova's report says you cleared the back of that building in under a minute." Silently, he took a breath. "You seem to possess a certain skill set. A skill set I desperately need right now. I need those hostages back. I need that building clear. You got yourself noticed, specialist. Now you're going to solve this." It wasn't a question. It was a suicide mission, and they both knew it. He was throwing her at an impossible problem, hoping for a miracle. Anya's eyes flickered to the schematic of the admin annex on the screen. She absorbed the layout in a single glance. 2 floors, central staircase, external fire escape on the west wall, large plate glass windows on the ground floor facing the plaza. "The windows are tempered safety glass, reinforced with polycarbonate film," she said, her voice low. "Small arms won't breach it effectively. The doors will be blocked from the inside. The central stairs are a fatal funnel. They'll be watching it." Madsen stared. She had dissected the tactical problem in seconds. "So it's impossible." Anya's gaze shifted to the roofline on the schematic. "What's on the roof?" "HVAC units. A satellite dish." "Nothing," Madsen's XO replied. "There's a maintenance hatch for the HVAC system," Anya stated. It wasn't a question. "It leads to the main ventilation shaft. The shaft is 3 feet by 3 feet. It runs vertically down through the building, with service vents into the second-floor offices and the ground-floor conference room." The entire TOC staff stared at her. How could she possibly know that? "How do you know that?" Madsen asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I read the blueprints when I was auditing the fire suppression system manifests last week," she said simply. "The hostages are likely being held in the ground-floor conference room. It's the largest space with the fewest windows." She looked back at Madsen, her dark eyes holding his. The test had been issued. This was her answer. "I can use the ventilation shaft. I'll need a fiber optic scope, 3 canisters of CS gas, a suppressed pistol, and night vision goggles. Sergeant Rostova's team can create a diversion on the west side of the building. Draw their attention to the fire escape. I'll go in from the roof. There was a stunned silence. It was a plan of insane audacity, terrifying precision, and it was the only viable option they had. Madsen looked at this quiet, unassuming woman. He had threatened her, belittled her, and completely misjudged her. Now, he was betting the lives of a dozen civilians and the fate of his command on her. "Get her whatever she needs," he said, his voice hoarse. "And get Rostova on the radio. Tell her she's the diversion." He looked back at Anya, a new, grudging respect dawning in his eyes. "Good luck, specialist." Anya just gave a single, sharp nod. The test was accepted. She turned to gather her gear, her mind already inside the walls of that building, moving through the darkness. As Anya gathered her equipment, a parallel drama was unfolding hundreds of miles away. The partial lifting of the EW blackout had allowed a single, garbled data burst to escape Fob Concordia. It was a high-priority alert, triggered automatically by the base's defense systems, containing fragmented reports of a major attack and a catastrophic command and control failure. The alert landed on the desk of Admiral Garrett Thorne, the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, who was on a temporary assignment overseeing regional operations from Bagram Airfield. Thorne was a man forged in the crucible of clandestine warfare, with ice water for blood and a legendary intolerance for failure. He read the alert, his expression hardening. A failing FOB was a problem. A failing FOB commander was a liability. "Get me Colonel Madsen at FOB Concordia," he commanded his aide, a young, sharp lieutenant named Chun. "Sir, we can't get a stable voice link. We're getting corrupted data packets, but that's it," Chun replied. "The report mentions an unauthorized operative engaging the enemy." Thorne's eyes narrowed. An unauthorized operative could mean anything from a heroic soldier stepping up to a rogue element causing more chaos. "Get me a name and a service number. Use the priority data channel. I want to know who is running their own war on my map." Back at Concordia, Madsen, consumed by a desperate need to understand the woman he had just sent into the heart of the fire, had given his own aide a similar order. "I want everything you can find on Specialist Anya Sharma. Everything. I don't care what clearances you have to break." The two requests, one from an admiral and one from a colonel, hit the personnel servers at the same time. The system, cross-referencing the requests with the name and service number, flagged an anomaly. Anya Sharma's file was layered with access restrictions that required flag officer-level authority to bypass. Lieutenant Chen's console beeped. "Sir, the file on Specialist Sharma is almost completely black. It's sealed by a SOCOM directive. I can't get in." "Use my authority," Thorne said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Override it." Chun typed in the Admiral's command codes. The screen flickered, and lines of text began to appear, scrolling past locks and warnings. At FOB Concordia, Madsen's aide hit the same wall, but Chen's override, coming from a 4-star admiral, unlocked the deepest layers of the file. The data began to stream to Chen's datapad. As Chun began to read, Anya was on the move. Rostova's team opened up on the west side of the admin annex, a furious fusillade of suppressive fire and smoke grenades. It was a perfectly executed diversion. Every hostile eye in the building swiveled to face the fake assault. Under the cover of the noise, Anya scaled the east wall, using a grappling hook and line she had acquired from the depot. She moved up the concrete face of the building with the silent, spider-like grace of someone for whom gravity was merely a suggestion. She reached the roof, clipped her line, and moved to the HVAC maintenance hatch. It was locked. She pulled a tension wrench and pick from a small pouch and went to work. 30 seconds later, the lock clicked open. In Bagram, Chen's breath caught in his throat. "Admiral, you need to see this," he handed the datapad to Thorne. The Admiral began to read. Name, Sharma, Anya. Rank, Master Chief Petty Officer. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. SEAL Team. The number was redacted, but DevGru was the only unit that mattered. Thorne's eyes scanned the mission history. Operation Nightshade, Operation Iron Citadel, Operation Silent Serpent. All of them were legendary within the Spec Ops community, ghost stories of impossible successes, most attributed to anonymous task force elements. Anya lowered herself into the pitch-black ventilation shaft. It was a tight fit, her shoulders brushing the sides. She engaged her night vision goggles, the world turning a ghostly green. She descended using friction, her back against one wall, her feet against the other, making no sound. Thorn read a mission summary. Operation Nightshade. Solo infiltration of a fortified Chechen command bunker. Objective neutralized. Zero compromise. He looked at the commendations. The Navy Cross, awarded in a classified ceremony. 2 silver stars. 3 bronze stars with V for valor. His eyes landed on a specific line item. Call sign Callie. Thorn's blood ran cold. Callie. Not a Callie. The Callie. A legend. A ghost story whispered in hushed tones in the training rooms at Dam Neck and Coronado. The operative they sent in when a SEAL team was too loud. The one who went into the dark and made the monsters disappear. He remembered the rumors. Callie had gone too far on one mission, a mission in Syria that went horribly wrong. The official story was that she had been killed in action. The unofficial one was that she had been quietly and unceremoniously buried by the command to cover up a political disaster. They hadn't killed her. They had sent her to Fob Concordia to count boxes. Anya reached the second-floor level. She used the fiber-optic scope, feeding it through the vent slats into an empty office. Clear. She continued down. She reached the vent that led to the ground-floor conference room. Slowly, carefully, she snaked the scope through. The view resolved. 10 hostages, huddled in the center of the room, crying silently. 8 hostiles. For watching the door, 2 watching the windows, and 2 standing over the hostages, their rifles ready. The leader was talking on a radio, his back to the vent. Thorn looked up from the datapad, his face a mask of stone. "Lieutenant," he said. His voice tight with a fury Chun had never heard. "Get me a helicopter. Get me a secure channel to Colonel Matson's TOC. And get me there yesterday." Anya pulled back the scope. The plan was set. She took the first CS gas canister, pulled the pin, and dropped it through the vent. She immediately did the same with the other 2, dropping them in different corners of the room. The canisters erupted. The room filled with thick, choking gas. The hostiles roared in surprise and pain, their eyes streaming. The hostages screamed. In that moment of perfect chaos, Anya kicked out the vent cover. She dropped into the room, a 10-foot fall, landing in a silent crouch. Her suppressed pistol was already in her hand. The hostiles were blinded, disoriented, firing wildly. She was not. In the green-tinged world of her night vision, moving through the swirling gas, she was the apex predator. Pop pop. A double tap to the first hostile. He crumpled. Pop pop. The second. She moved, a fluid engine of death. They never saw her. They were firing at shadows, at sounds. She was the only thing that was real. Pop 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 pop. The leader turned, his eyes streaming, raising his rifle. Anya was already there. 1 precise shot to the head. He dropped. 8 hostiles. 16 shots. 12 seconds. Silence, broken only by the coughing of the hostages. Anya moved to the main door, cleared the barricade, and opened it. "Clear," she said, her voice calm, as if she had just finished an inventory audit. The moment the admin annex door opened, the world seemed to hold its breath. Sergeant Rostova and her team, poised to storm the building, froze. They saw the silhouettes of the hostages stumbling out, weeping and choking from the gas. And then they saw her. Anya Sharma stood in the doorway, a dark shape against the light from within, her suppressed pistol held low at her side. She was covered in dust and grime, but she stood with an unshakable stillness. The crisis was over. Just then, the percussive chop of helicopter blades tore through the air. A Black Hawk, flying fast and low without running lights, flared for a landing in the plaza, its rotor wash kicking up a blinding storm of dust. This was no medevac. It was an arrival of authority. The side door slid open and Admiral Garrett Thorne stepped out, ducking under the still spinning blades. He was a tall, imposing figure, his uniform immaculate despite the chaos around him. He ignored the salutes of the scrambled soldiers, his eyes scanning the scene until they found her. He strode past a dumbfounded Colonel Madsen, his boots crunching on spent shell casings, his path unwavering. Anya watched him approach. She recognized him. Not personally, but she knew the rank, and she knew the hard, unforgiving set of his jaw. It was the look of a man from her old world. She braced herself for the repercussions. She had acted without orders, violated the chain of command, and used lethal force on a scale that would create a mountain of paperwork. She expected to be arrested or worse. Thorn stopped directly in front of her. Medics were rushing forward with a stretcher, but he waved them off with a curt gesture. He didn't speak. He simply looked at her. He saw the filth and the blood. He saw the exhausted calm in her eyes. He saw the M4 slung over her back and the suppressed pistol in her hand. He didn't see Specialist Sharma, the logistics clerk. He didn't see the disgraced operator. He saw Master Chief Petty Officer Sharma. He saw Kali. The entire base, it seemed, had gone silent. Every soldier, from the privates on the perimeter to Colonel Madsen standing by the TOC, was watching. They saw the highest-ranking officer in the theater of operations facing down the quiet logistics specialist who had just single-handedly saved them all. Slowly, with a precision that mirrored Anya's own disciplined movements, Admiral Thorn brought his right hand up to the brim of his cover. It was not the casual salute of a passing officer. It was a formal, rigid, and deeply personal gesture. A salute of profound, undeniable respect. From a four-star admiral to a specialist. From one warrior to another. Anya was stunned. For a decade, respect had been her currency, earned in blood and secrecy. For the past year, she had been starved of it, buried under a mountain of condescension and dismissal. This single public gesture was a vindication more powerful than any medal. Her training, her instinct took over. She transferred her pistol to her left hand and returned the salute, her own movement just as sharp, just as precise. For a long moment, they held the salute, an island of perfect military formality in a sea of destruction. In that silence, the hierarchy of the base dissolved. There was no admiral, no specialist. There were only two constants of the military universe, the reality of combat and the respect earned by those who can master it. Thorn finally dropped his hand. "Your file," he said, his voice low and gravelly, for her ears only. "Does not do you justice, Master Chief." He used her true rank. He used her title. "They made a mistake sending you here. They sent me where they thought I belonged, Admiral," Anya replied, her voice steady, though a tremor of emotion she hadn't felt in years ran through her. "They were wrong," Thorn stated, his eyes boring into hers. "Welcome back to the war, Sharma. We have a lot to talk about." He turned to the pale-faced Madsen. "Colonel, my office." Now he didn't wait for a reply, striding back toward his helicopter, leaving a changed world in his wake. Weeks turned into a month. The physical wounds Anya had sustained, a deep gash on her arm from a piece of shrapnel, bruised ribs from the fall, healed with a practiced indifference. The deeper wounds, the ones carved by betrayal and exile, had begun to scar over, patched by the potent balm of respect. Fob Concordia was a different place. The story of that night had spread through the ranks like wildfire, mutating into legend. They called her the Ghost of Concordia. Soldiers no longer looked through her. They looked at her with a mixture of fear and reverence. When she walked to the mess tent, conversations would quiet, and a path would clear for her. Corporal Tanaka would ensure her coffee was always fresh. Sergeant Rostova would nod to her, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a shared understanding forged in the crucible of combat. Anya never acknowledged the change. She continued her duties, performed her tasks, and maintained her silence. The silence, however, now had a different weight. It was no longer the silence of the ignored, but the silence of the formidable. Colonel Madsen avoided her entirely. He had received a dressing down from Admiral Thorn that was rumored to have been audible from the flight line. His command was now under review, his career hanging by a thread. He had underestimated the most dangerous person on his base, and that failure was absolute. His arrogance had been replaced by a haunted, hollow look. He had seen a ghost, and it had judged him. Admiral Thorne had been true to his word. A week after the attack, a secure packet had arrived for Anya, contained transfer orders. Not to another logistics depot, but to a liaison role at MacDill Air Force Base, the home of SOCOM. It was an offer, a door back into the world she had been cast out of. The orders sat on the small table beside her bunk, and signed. She had thought about it. Part of her, the part that was forged in the hell of BUD/S and honed in 100 secret wars, yearned for it. It was a return to purpose, to the only life she truly understood. But another part of her hesitated. That world had broken her, not physically, but spiritually. It had used her, her unique and lethal talents, and then discarded her when she became inconvenient. They had branded her unstable, a liability, because she had brought back the horrors they had sent her to create. Going back felt like forgiving an unforgivable betrayal. This evening, she did not walk the perimeter. She sat on an empty ammunition crate at the edge of the base, watching the sun bleed across the desert sky, painting the mountains in hues of orange, purple, and blood red. The oppressive heat of the day was beginning to yield to the cool desert night. In her hands was her K-bar knife. She wasn't sharpening it. She was cleaning it, her movements slow and meditative. The oil, the cloth, the feel of the worn leather grip. It was a ritual, a form of communion with the part of herself that would never change, regardless of rank or posting. She thought of the men she had killed in the admin annex. She didn't feel remorse, but she felt the weight of them. Each life taken was a stone she had to carry. In the teams, they carried them together. Here, she carried them alone. But the solitude was different now. It was no longer the solitude of an outcast, but the solitude of a summit. A shadow fell over her. It was Corporal Tanaka. He held out a steaming mug. "Thought you might want this, specialist," he said, his voice quiet, respectful. He didn't use her first name. No one did anymore. Specialist had become a title of its own, imbued with a meaning far beyond its official designation. Anya looked up, her eyes meeting his. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and took the mug. The warmth spread through her fingers. Tanaka lingered for a moment, as if wanting to say more, then seemed to think better of it. He simply nodded and walked away, leaving her to her solitude. She took a sip of the coffee. It was black, bitter, just how she liked it. She looked from the unsigned transfer orders on her bunk to the vast, darkening desert before her. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a choice. She could go back to being Callie, the Admiral's ghost, a weapon to be wielded in the shadows. Or she could stay here as Sharma, a quiet specialist who had earned her peace, not by forgetting who she was, but by forcing the world to remember. She didn't know which path she would choose. But as she sat there, the cleaned knife resting on her knee, watching the last sliver of sun disappear behind the mountains, she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer an exile. She was her own woman, in a place she had inadvertently conquered not with force, but with competence. Her dignity was her own, her respect was earned, and her silence was now her throne. The desert was quiet, and for the first time so was the war inside her.